in our development planning, we are more and more talking about development communication. And it's a way of bringing our planning, policy making, monitoring, evaluation to the people. Our goal as a nation is to bring development and decisions to the people in our communities and in our various levels of governance. And when we think of the communities and the individuals in the communities, the households, our biggest stakeholders, they are the people whose lives are impacted directly or indirectly by the policies or programs we devise. And the media, more than ever, is a way to reach everybody. If they understand, they can share the ideas, they can convey that sentiment. If they don't understand, even the best efforts and the best intentions can derail the program. We know how hard the media works and strives to get information to the people. And so in this, we want to be able to share knowledge about what this is about, what the sectors are doing, which sectors are crucial. So we are here to be informed of what the current situation is, the current thinking about demographic dividend, what it really is, and why we should care as planners, as a country, and how we can do things properly. We also hope that in the process you will form your opinions about how to project these ideas, how to inform the public, educate the public, so that the public can also ask the right questions of their leaders, of our community leaders, and of our district governance systems.
Today we have a very important task ahead of us. As a country, Ghana, if we want to move forward in quantum leaps, there are certain things that we have got to do. If we do it and we get it right, this country starts to benefit enormously. If we don't do those things, and therefore we do not get it right, then we'll continue to bounce at the bottom of the pile. We're here to look at demographic dividend. We're here to look at our governance systems, the economy of this country. We have to look at the health of our people. And we've got to look at educating our people. I think these are four fundamental things that if we get them right, then this country will move in quantum leaps.
I'm very pleased this morning as the UN Resident Coordinator to be a part of this event and to be associated with this coming together of experts and professionals in the field of demography, in the field of people who work in the media, people who work on development issues, as well as also politicians, because we actually all need to come together to discuss the future that we want, and especially in relation to a very, very pertinent and important question, which is the population change. Within this context, the fact that Ghana is having this discussion here today is very pertinent and it's very important, because the results of your discussions here will be shared with other countries who have already undergone this dialogue or who will be undergoing it, and it will help shape the vision that the Africa region has in terms of how do we harness Africa's demographic dividend. So that's very important, to be able to have an African vision of this. At the same time, the consultations will also feed into a regional conference report, which will actually serve as the reference document for population and development in terms of policies and programs that will be developed post the ICPD agenda. But a second, more important reason for Ghana being involved in these consultations is that there is a lot of discussion, and especially even at the General Assembly right now, that's looking at how do we inform the development agenda post-2015.
I'm very pleased to be with you today and explore a concept that have been very much discussed about over the last few years when we talk about the African continent. Harnessing the demographic dividend for Ghana's development, two concepts that do not necessarily go together. Demographic refers to a country's population. Here in Ghana, a young population, the percentage of active population is about 60%. Educated population, 2/3 of the adult population in Ghana can read and write, and a population eager to live better. Whereas dividend belong to the banking vocabulary. Dividend meaning the return we get on an investment. So difficult, in my opinion, to associate this word to population for fear of potentially referring to any form of human exploitation. And yet, by demographic dividend, we are indeed referring to human capital and how a country can benefit from its own population, assuming it is in good health, well-trained, and facing job opportunities, available in a transparent and fluid labor market.
The demographic dividend has to do with demographic transition and changing age structure. And here you have two examples of a very young population, which could be Ghana population, with many youth, more than half of the population, less than 20, which is perceived as a positive thing. To be young is good, to be old is bad, okay? Except that nobody wants to die before his time has come, okay? And all countries, which could be Germany, which could be UK, which could be Korea, and China, and the dilemma of China is that maybe the pyramid of China looks like more or less that. But maybe they will get older before being rich, or maybe they will be rich before becoming older. And that's one of the challenges of the demographic dividend. One thing should be borne in mind is that there are two demographic dividends. During the demographic transition, the age structure change and the dependency ratio, the number of people, those who are working are supporting, decrease. The entry of many youth in the workforce can increase the output and saving per capita and foster sustainable growth. These are the benefits of the first demographic dividend. Later on, the working age population mature and the prospect for retirement and the lengthening of life expectancy push people to invest, to accumulate assets, to prepare their retirement. This additional saving can either be consumed, used to prolong economic growth. This later stage of economic growth has been termed the second demographic dividends. And you have to keep in mind the following things. If you look at the 10 top countries in terms of economic power in the world, more than half of them are very aged population. Japan, UK, China, and so on, are population with many old people. And finally, they are old, but they are rich or richer, whereas when you are too young, maybe you are not as rich. benefiting the demographic dividend is not automatic. It's not because you have many, many young people in your population that they will generate a lot of income. Harnessing the demographic dividend is just like sitting under a mango tree waiting for the mango falling, okay? You have to sweat a bit and you have to prepare it. So you have to create first a window of opportunity, the demographic window of opportunity, and next you have to capitalize on the demographic dividend. This implies 4 things. First, accelerating the demographic transition. Second, improving the human capital, which means invest massively in health and education, saving and investing in valued added activities, having a legal, institutional, and political reliable environment, and creating many jobs with high productivity. So 5 conditions, like the 5 fingers of the fertility transition, human capital, saving, investing, governance, and jobs. Reaping the demographic dividend has to do with the demographic transition. The demographic transition is a shift from a traditional demographic regime with high and uncontrolled mortality level and fertility level. And the aim of the demographic transition is to have controlled fertility and controlled mortality, which correspond to around 2 children per woman and a life expectancy of 80 years. Unique period is in between, where the natural increase is very important, between 1% and 3% depending on the country, and this is also the period where you can reap the demographic dividend. Where is Ghana in terms of its fertility transition? The problem with Ghana is that Ghana has been one of the first countries with Kenya in sub-Saharan Africa to launch a national family planning program and to have a national population commission. 40 years later, Ghana is not far. Of course, the maximum population growth rate has been reached in the 60s and 70s, 3% per year, but it's still at 2.2% per year now. Whereas, for instance, in Latin America and in Asia, the population growth rate now is less than 1% in many, many countries. This still high population growth rate is a result of stalling in fertility decline. If you look at the fertility, it was almost 7 according to the United Nations in the 60s, 70s. It has gone down, but if you look at the dot, the red dot, which are the result of the surveys, including the 2011 mixed survey, it has been stalling at around 4 children per woman since the mid-90s. So the problem of Ghana is stalling. Ghana is halfway of its demographic transition, and Ghana seems to be stuck there. The result of this stalling has been a very rapidly growing population. The population today is 3 times the population at the time of independence, and you have more than tripling of the number of youth, more tripling of the active population, but the job has not been there, and many people still work today in the informal sector with very badly paid work or in subsistence agriculture. In comparison of what we call the emerging countries, I took the example of Korea. I have no interest in Samsung or whatever Korean company, but in many often the comparison is done with Korea because this has been one of the most successful emerging countries, passing from a status of underdeveloped countries in the 50s after a long war, as you know, to now Korea is one of the members of the G20, although it has a small population, 50 million people. So Korea in the 60s have a population very young, 50% of the population was below 20, and the dependency ratio, so these people have to be taken care of by those who are working. 50 years later, this is a pyramid of Korea. All the young are older, they are here. The number of births have decreased. Now the percentage of less than 20 years is something like 20%. They are more old people, but the Koreans are very rich by international standards. They are members of the G20. They are very rich. This doesn't mean that they are happier, because happiness is something else. As a result, if we compare the evolution of GDP, total GDP and GDP per capita in Ghana and in Korea, here you have base 100 in 1960. The GDP per capita, total GDP has been multiplied by 30. Okay? The GDP per capita has been multiplied by 15 folds. Whereas in Ghana, the total GDP has been multiplied by 5. This means that the Ghanaians have worked, okay? They have produced things. But because of persisting high level of fertility, most of what they have done have been invested in taking care of the children. So the increase in Ghana has been only 1.5. So since the 60s, Korea had a sustained economic growth of 8%, a bit down now with the crisis, okay? And Ghana has had a much lower, the green bar, economic growth, except that in recent years, okay, the economic growth has been booming in Ghana, reaching something like 6% per year. But again, when you look at the per capita growth, the per capita growth has been sustained and it's still more than 3% per year in Korea, whereas in Ghana, in the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, there has been a negative growth in the GDP per capita, okay? Whereas it has been up a bit now with 4% per year, okay? But that's a result of very peculiar condition, and nobody is sure that this type of growth is sustainable. This different path of development over the 15 years is a result of what we call the generational economy, which is the economic flows across generation. A society functions on an implicit agreement between the generation. There are people who are working, producing more or less revenue and income, and this income go to partly to the states, okay? And the state benefit from revenue from natural resources and export, plus international development assistance, foreign development investment, and remittances, some remittances from the migrants. These people working are consuming. They have also to take care of the children and of the elderly, okay? So the more children you have, the more these people are obliged to give money, either to the state or to their children, to go to school, to be taken care of in terms of health, and so on. They have also to take care of their old parents, and so on. Okay? In the case of Ghana, most of what has been produced has been invested in children, and these children represent both hope for a better future, but it represents also a challenge in terms of job, as we'll see later. If we know what is really specific about Africa, is that if you look at the history since the 19th, 20th century in the world, you will see that the population growth have never exceeded 1% per year in the developed country, Western Europe and so on, except in the States, Australia and so on, but because immigration. Whereas in Africa, the demographic condition has been very, very specific in two ways. The first way is that the maximum, the red line, has been 2% or even more, and whereas it has decreased in Latin America, in Asia and in Latin America, it has continued to increase in recent years in Africa. So two specific features about the demographic condition in Africa. High very level during a long period of time, and level which are still increasing, whereas they have decreased sharply in other parts of the world. So the result is that at the world level, if you look at East Asia and Southeast Asia, you see that the GDP has grown very fast, and the GDP per capita has been multiplied by 6, with a superstar like Korea multiplied by 15. Whereas in Africa, again, the GDP has been multiplied by 6, but the GDP per capita has increased only by 50%, which is a figure found for Ghana. Of course, Africa is booming, and Africa now is the most fast-growing region of the world. And if you look back, one of the fast regions of the world after Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia, Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, and so on, is booming more, but they are now reaping the demographic dividend because they have reduced very sharply their fertility, which is not the case on Africa. And by the way, if you look at the GDP per capita, the GDP per capita has increased very importantly, for instance, in Southeast Asia in recent years, whereas in Africa, 60% of the gain in economic growth has been absorbed by the demographic growth. So this means that the people are not benefiting much from the exceptional economic growth of this past year. Now, can Ghana harness the demographic dividend? I'm coming back to the 5 conditions accelerating the demographic transition. First, what is the population of Ghana today? 25 million, 24? No, it is increasing 500,000 per year. So today is 26, okay? So you have to take into account that it's increasing 500,000 per year, okay? So I start at 26. If I look at the UN population projection, low fertility assumption, meaning that the fertility will decrease from 4 to 2 by 2050. Medium to 2.5, constant fertility, the style will continue at 4 children per woman up to 2050. The result is as follows. The low fertility assumption yield 40 million people with a stabilization of the population, say, after 2050. The constant assumption leads to yield 60 million in 2050, and it continues, it can go up to 120. Okay? So, the future is partly written. Partly written because the population will at least double in the next 40 years. That's written because there are many young, and these young people will need legitimately to have children. Okay? But it will be between 40 or 60 million, depending on what's going to happen. In terms of population growth, of course, if there is no change, the population growth will remain around 2% per year, okay? And with this 2% per year will absorb the economic growth. If we take the low assumption to children per year, okay, it can go up to 0.5% per year, which is more or less the rate of growth in Korea, in China, and in many Asian countries and Latin American countries at the moment. Happen is that in 2010, there are 5 million youths between 15 to 24, which correspond to 350,000 entry every year in the labor market. Okay? And that's a percentage of those, not all of these 15-24 will enter the labor market, but if we take a 70% rate, participation rate, it will be 350. And the dependency ratio is still over 100 dependent for only 100 persons of working age. If we go for 2 children per woman by 2050, the number of youths will continue to increase here. That's also written in the age structure. But the number of people entering the labor force will increase slightly too. But the dependency ratio will be lower. It will be more or less in the tune of what is observed now in many emerging countries. If we go to the 3 children per woman, you will see the difference. Only 1 child difference. 2 children, 3 children. 1 child difference means that the number of youths to be taken care of will double from now up to 50. The number of entry in the labor market will go to more or less almost the double of what it is now, 650 per thousand per year. And the dependency ratio will still be very high. An additional challenge will be the urbanization of the country. 2050, according to the UN projection, between 70 and 75% of the population will live in the rural area, which means that Accra and Kumasi will triple their population from 3 to 7 million to 2 to 6 million, representing more or less 40% of the